Tell them about boggy850.com, my guy.
Today I am wearing the coolest of cool, the Boggy hat from boggy850.com. And Christopher, I heard that they're going to offer all of our listeners and watchers 10% off. How do they get that?
It's indeed the correct assumption or statement. Boggy850.com is where you can buy these things. And check out if you put in Midbay News, they will give you 10% off and may like to support a startup as we are one. And love to have the small business vibes with the Z at the end going all around to all of our homies. So shout out to Tori and boggy850.com for the hats this week and their support of our show and their sharing of all of our stuff. As a special treat just for Paul, I've spoken to his favorite university at Florida State University's planning and zoning professor extraordinaire, Sam Staley, more than 30 years in the business, talking about what he believes is the problem with housing in America and in Western Florida specifically, and what we can do about it to fix it so that people can actually afford to live here. Paul, you're going to love it. I'm just going to tell you right now, you're going to become a Florida State fan, at least of the School of Social Sciences and Public Policy after this.
I could make a joke about us needing to go get the other side of the coin at the University of Florida and their urban and regional planning department. But hey, we'll take this interview and I'll listen to it and I'll give my feedback next week. How about that?
Sounds awesome. So anyway, let's get right into it. Like I said, it is budget season and the first two to go public with their initial budgets, Okaloosa County and Walton County. I'd say let's just go ahead and kind of start with the top line stuff. Walton is thinking about potentially lowering their taxing rate, making you a little bit richer. And I mean
A little
a
bit.
little bit richer. And Okaloosa County is planning on holding the line where it is. And let's look over at Walton County right now. Walton County is thinking about lowering its millage rate to where you, the average homeowner, would save about $16 per year. So put that in your bank account and
Oh, hey,
smile.
that's a night out at Nick's or something. I mean,
It's half a night now. If you're going to go by yourself,
yeah, that's
maybe.
what I'm saying. You get a meal at Nick's and maybe a beer and a nice view of the Choctawhatchee Bay for 16 bucks.
Eh, well, I go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, it's. I feel like it's a politician's dream to be able to stand in front of their constituents and say, "I lowered your taxes," and that sort of feels like what Walton County's doing here. I mean, obviously the county has needs, but it seems silly to lower this for 16 bucks a household, ignore some of those needs that you could use that surplus for, just so you can politically say that I lowered people's taxes. But that's just how I feel about it. I mean, do you have a differing opinion or like a take on this?
I think it's more of a take than an opinion. So this measure went 4-1. The one dissenter was Brad Drake. He's a commissioner, I think, for kind of like the northwestern side. He's one of the northern county commissioners, and essentially said like, "Hey, we should lower it more. We should take the $13.69 million of excess revenue from compared to last year and give it all back to the residents. That would equate to about, I think, like $450 a year per taxpayer. That's a significant chunk of change. The trade-off, of course, is that then you don't have as much money to work with to maintain. And that's the key, right? Is not building new roads. It's maintaining the old roads and the sewer system and the sheriff's department, because all those things either go up in expense or become older. And so the other four commissioners are like, look, man, I think that it's great that you want to lower taxes, but we need to make sure the roads are paved. And he argued like, hey, we're conservatives. And I guess to Brad Drake, conservatism means lowering taxes, right? Whether or not they need to be lowered or need that extra money for infrastructure is very much up for debate. And we can have that debate. But I think kind of two different philosophies within what I would call like the Republican Party of Walton County. I mean, they're all Republicans, right? So who's the most Republican? Who's the most conservative? What does
Yeah,
conservative even mean?
sure.
Those are all things that they're going to have to figure out during this budget process. Does conservative mean lowest bidder possible, least amount of taxes, regardless of what you need? Maybe. I don't know. It really kind of is up to the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, $16 per household just seems like just a silly amount. I mean, I I'm fiscally conservative as well. If there's fat in the budget and they think they can cut it and return 400 and something bucks back to households, I would definitely be for that. But and I'm not up on all the needs of Walton County by any means. But if they could use 13, $14 million that they don't necessarily have budgeted now for something important in the near future, maybe leaving taxes flat is the way to go.
Yeah, so the at the end of the day, I think what they're moving toward in that 4-to-1 vote is to give $1 million in property tax revenue back to the taxpayer. That's at $16, right? And then other 10 or 11 or $12 million is going to go towards specific infrastructure projects, is kind of the way they talked about it. At least that's the way Commissioner Danny Glidewell, who kind of represents the eastern side of Walton County, kind of alluded to in his discussion. But looking at other stuff that's going on over in Okaloosa County.
Well, Christopher, isn't Okaloosa County doing something a little bit different? I mean, they're not decreasing taxes, they're kind of leaving the property tax rate flat, right?
Yeah, so the property tax rate, and I should say this about Walton County before I forget. Walton County has usually, if not the lowest, it's one of the lowest, one of the top two. Typically, the three lowest tax rates in Florida for county taxes are Monroe County, so Key West, right? Because the property values are just so high. Kind of think about Destin. Destin has a very low property tax value because, again, the property values are so high. And then either Okaloosa or Walton comes in second place. So yeah, this year there's a bunch of budget requests that our colleague Colin Bester did an in-depth piece on midbaynews.com, and I will link it down here so you guys can read it if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or somewhere else. But there's a bunch of projects in here or initiatives. And Paul, what really stuck out to you, man?
Well, I mean, you have like really critical needs across elections and public safety, and but the one that sort of sticks out is corrections.
Hmm.
So the county jail apparently is operating at 25% over capacity, and they definitely want to add more beds, which is sort of a sad thing when you think about it. But
Well,
I
it's
guess it's a
also kind
need.
of it's deeply unpopular, right? Because nobody wants to pay for somebody else to be in jail, right? No, and they especially don't want to build something new. But kind of in the past, I think it was 1991. It was the early 90s. The Okaloosa County got a consent decree from the federal government because their prison was so very small, or their jail was so very small, that the federal government mandated that they add on to the prison, right? And it was like one of those, like, you do it or we're like coming after you.
That's crazy.
So that was the last expansion to where we are now, for 594 beds. And so it looks like, according to Deputy County Administrator Jason Autry, they're moving in the direction where they're going to be putting together a 2,000 bed facility in some point in the future. So there's about 920 people on an average day, I think, or excuse me, 720 people on an average day in Okaloosa County. So this would be almost triple the amount of capacity.
Well, I mean, I think they're getting ahead of it as we continue to grow, and more people move here. It's all people always joke like, we're so far behind on road construction and
Mhm.
expanding infrastructure. By the time you expand it, you just got to get ready to expand it again. So maybe they're overshooting a little bit just to make up for that type of scenario.
My eye was the elections costs, right? So we had, I think, four elections that were, so we had last summer's primary election, the general election, that's two, and then two more special elections and a municipal election in there. So five elections in the last year, right? When we would maybe have one or two, maybe, right? In that same span. And it cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of an extra $300,000 in unexpected costs. You had to throw in a huge piece of that. About half of that was for like an election integrity measure that came from the state. It was like a software upgrade that the county ended up paying for, even though it was mandated by the state. So they're having to find a way to scrape together cash to make sure that they can cover that in the coming year as well.
Very interesting. The thing that I found awesome in your story or interesting in your story was the tourism aspect and
Mhm.
how overall we were like 5% down for the year, but that still put $32 million in bed tax revenue into our coffers to do stuff here locally, which is awesome. 32 million.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm not totally, and maybe they just had a really good couple of months since I spoke to Jennifer Adams Camp last, but the last time we spoke, we were down and now we're up. And so Colin Bester, Midbay News reporter extraordinaire, is looking into that right now. He's put in a couple of records requests, asked for an interview to kind of like be like, hey, did we miss something? Do we misunderstand it? And so we're looking into why, at one point it was down and now it's up. Um, But again, we stand by reporting because we got the interviews. So we'll see what has changed in the last couple of months. And then the last thing I'll say about this $60 million request thing, they talked about a request for a new upgraded convention center. And I had the distinct pleasure of working with Nathan Boyles both in government and outside of government for a while. And if there's one whipping boy that he loved to beat up on, it was the convention center. His favorite stat was that it loses $500,000 a year for the taxpayer. And so now they want to build a new one and make it bigger. And I am interested to hear what now State Representative Nathan Boyles thinks of that.
Yeah, it's surprising. I mean, you think a convention center here would do well, right? People
Mhm.
come here, they go to a convention or an activity for a couple of days and they go to the beach and they get to experience all that. But for it to lose $500,000 a year is pretty crazy when you think about it. And then to want to spend, millions upon millions of dollars to build a new one, I don't know. Doesn't sound like a good return on investment.
And of course, as we find out that stuff, the best way to get in hold of us and get regular updates, midbaynews.com/newsletter is where you can get on our newsletter list. We put out jam-packed newsletters multiple times a week to make sure that you know what's going on and are an informed and educated member of our area. Everything from budget stories like this to crime news to sports. I mean, football season is coming up, folks. If you want to know exactly who stands where, we have all that stuff and more, midbaynews.com/newsletter. Well, and if you need legal expertise that you can trust, check out Lisa Patel Law Firm. Lisa Patel, has over 20 years of transactional experience specializing in taxation, estate planning, wills and trusts, and business law. She has multiple advanced degrees in all of those subjects, including, of course, her Juris Doctorate. So if you need her, if you need somebody to help you with anything from your last will and testament to selling a business, she's the lady you want to talk to. You can get with her by calling 850-279-9679 or email her at lyp@lyp-law.com for a free consultation. A law firm, professional, honest, integrity, working hard for you. So, Paul, let's look into the week ahead, my guy.
That's what I'm saying. Christopher, talk to us a little bit about what the locals need to know story wise and what you got cooking.
And then the whole gun range lawsuit. So this is kind of in the beginning stages of what I'm working on right now, but there is the Element Shooting Range up in Holt. They've been there for, I think, maybe 10 years. And they had a lawsuit filed against them for basically being a nuisance, loud, lots of guns going off. The state law says you can't sue a gun range for that because it's a gun range. It's just something that we put in state law. A local attorney, Mike Chesser, put a lawsuit on behalf of the family that lived nearby this gun range to say, like, hey, this is becoming a problem for their quality of life, the use of their land. The initial judge said, nope, state statute says you can't do that. So he filed with the appeals court and said, hey, the law itself, the noise ordinance or noise control law for gun ranges is unconstitutional because it deprives the family that has the land there of their right to go to the courts. Court access is a big deal in all of the previous Florida constitutions. And then it deprives them of the use of their own property, the expected use of their own property, something that also dates back to common law, which all, of course, most, not Louisiana, but the other 49 states base their law on is English common law. So really in depth, has a lot of implications for private property rights around the state of Florida, both for homeowners and for businesses. And it looks like Mike Chester might have overturned a law.
What an interesting story. So as a state, we have the ability to constitutionally carry.
Mhm.
We are very, very pro state when it comes to gun access, and that's why we had the law that we had about not being able to sue gun ranges over their noise. But then you have the other side of the coin where we're really strong property state as well, and you have people that are clearly being damaged, probably financially and from quality of life perspective from having this gun range right next door. So yeah, I think it's a super interesting case and love to see how it moves forward and what the implications are on a grander scale within the state of Florida.
Another battle of freedom from versus freedom to. And I think that's kind of lately, especially in state politics and state law, has been the biggest conversation we've had to have is freedom from versus freedom to, and which one is more important. So I would say this is very much a freedom from
Yeah.
win. And
Yeah.
so we'll see what that means on a wider scale here in Florida. And then if you're looking for a mortgage expert right here in Niceville, you should be looking for one. Now, I get it. Look, everybody, we're on the internet. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the internet's a bad thing, but the temptation to get a mortgage from push button click mortgage, not saying who that is pretty strong. I mean, the convenience there is something to be admired. But if you want something that's going to be convenient long term because you can actually reach somebody when something happens, or if you need to change something, or you need more information down the road, which is happens at a surprising amount of mortgages, you need to talk to Steve Shutt. Steve Shutt is the mortgage loan Steve Shutt is the mortgage loan officer extraordinaire, try and say that 5 times quickly, who can help you with everything from actually getting that loan to making sure that you qualify, to making sure all your ducks in a row so you get the best rate possible, to being there on the back end when you need somebody, because the mortgage doesn't really end once you sign all the paperwork. It's there for a while. And so you want to talk to Steve over at Movement Mortgage. You can check him out over at 1054 John Sims Parkway. You can also talk to them through their mobile phone thing, the box with the cell towers, and then also via email. We'll put all that stuff in the link of this video so that you can find them. But Steve's the guy, and Steve knows Niceville, and he can save people a bunch of money. So check him out.
Do the interview intro.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Nicevillians and those in the surrounding area, we know that current housing affordability is a challenge. So today on this podcast, you're going to see Christopher interview Professor Sam Staley from Florida State University, where they're going to discuss the current housing affordability issues across the United States. And so he's going to explain that the pandemic unexpectedly increased demand for larger homes and how that may have had an effect that might last for a little while. And so check out this interview and enjoy the discussion.
Well, Paul, I know you haven't seen the interview yet, but it was very good. And one of the things that I got away from it, not because of me, I should say, it was very good because of Professor Staley. I was just kind of there. But one of the things I thought was really interesting was the regional differences and how, we see this whole like affordable housing issue at the national level is like monolithic, right? But there's different factors that are creating housing affordability issues in different places. So California, for example, is unaffordable, but for a totally different set of reasons than why Florida is seeing an affordability crisis begin. So that was really interesting to me to see how regional it is. And we talked a little bit about interest rates and tariffs and other things of that nature that are not necessarily like, the screws and the wood and the labor. And he says the interest rates are what they are. There's nothing he can really do about it. But it is the tariffs. Those are the really things that are really interesting to him because of the deep water ports that we have here in Florida. He thinks that'll affect us disproportionately as opposed to places like Kansas where they're going to see increases, but it's not going to be directly related to the transit of that material. So thank you so much to Professor Staley for joining us today, and we'll be back just a minute.
If you're thinking about going to college in the Emerald Coast, Northwest Florida State College is a great place to look at. It's located here in Niceville, but they also have multiple campuses around the Panhandle. They service over 17,000 students, and as part of the Florida's public college system, they're accredited, and they have a wide array of possible bachelor's, associate, certificate programs, and now they have on-campus living. So it's no longer considered a commuter school. It's a school that folks are going to and living on campus. And overarchingly, their mission is preparing today's students for tomorrow's success. And I think that's exactly what we need in our future and our local economy. So give Northwest Florida State College an opportunity. Check out what they have to offer here locally. You can visit their Niceville campus at 100 College Boulevard East.
With me today is Professor Sam Staley. Professor Staley is over at Florida State University in the College of Public Policy and Social Sciences. And we're here to talk about housing because, as everybody that is watching this in the Emerald Coast knows, housing is kind of expensive and it's gotten more so in the last 10 years. So, Professor, you've talked a lot about this. You've written a lot about this. What's the situation? I guess let's go from the top down, from national to state to local, kind of west of Panama City. What are we looking at, and what are the biggest challenges you're seeing as you investigate this stuff?
We're at this moment in the national market where we have a housing affordability crunch that I don't think we've seen in a long, long time. And so the interesting thing is that we're facing this at the national level. Housing as an issue has become a national priority for both political parties. And I don't really, in my lifetime, remember that, or at least professional lifetime, remember that ever happening. But is it real or is it political? And in my view, it is real. And breaking it down from the national to the state to the regional is complicated because the dynamics are different. So the reasons why California is facing an affordability housing crisis are very different from, say, Michigan and Ohio, which is different from Texas, which is different from Florida. But the reality is, and what's sort of interesting is that nationally, this is a big issue. This is why we have major national candidates paying attention to this. And one of the interesting things that makes this moment different than any other time in our history is we had the COVID pandemic. One is that we thought when COVID was going to hit, massive recession, layoffs, and we were just afraid that the whole economy was going to collapse. Well, as it turns out, it didn't collapse. There are lots of people like me didn't lose their jobs. We couldn't go into work because because our offices were off, and of course, our campus was closed. But we didn't lose our jobs. So what happened is we had this concentration of wealth and income that didn't disappear. People are saying, you know what? I can use this cash to buy a new home. And and we do see in the literature, COVID-19 pandemic led to people buying larger homes. So maybe you were in that starter home and now you have built enough equity. Now you're thinking about something a little bigger rather than maybe 3 bedroom and 1.5 baths. Now you want 3 bedrooms or maybe even 4 bedrooms and 2 or 3 bathrooms and plus the yard. And so what happened is that increased the demand. Well, at the same time, we're having all of these supply chain problems, which makes it difficult for people to build housing. And then we have the restrictions on building housing. So you can see pretty quickly it's basic economics. Demand goes up, supply goes down, or stays the same, and then housing prices go out. But the bottom line is Florida has fallen behind in the supply of housing compared to the demand. And we are now trying to catch up. And it's going to be several years before we catch up. And so one of the things I emphasize to local communities is we need to change the way we think about housing rather than thinking about all the hoops you have to jump through. We have to look at how many of those regulations are absolutely necessary. And the other thing is I would like elected officials to begin to think in terms of super abundant housing, not thinking about, well, are these 15 houses going to be the right housing in this place? Let's recognize that we have a problem all the way up and down the housing ladder. We need to focus on producing more in lots of different segments. But I really think we're in a position we have to start building.
A lot of people at city council meetings that I've been to in the last couple of months are really, really uptight about increased density, right? If I had $1 for every time somebody wanted to build like a 6-unit apartment block next to a neighborhood that's not in the neighborhood and they're worried about crime and they're worried about increased traffic and all this stuff, what are you telling those people, those citizens that are concerned about all these perceived ills from more dense, more affordable housing?
I don't want to dismiss those concerns at all. However, there's a different way we can approach these issues. And I think this is where local officials, city commissioners, county commissioners, as well as those on planning boards need to rethink the way we engage citizens. And I am a big proponent of focusing on impacts. Completely understand we're concerned we get higher density, we have higher crime, we have to worry about maybe about property crimes, all that type of thing. But the question then becomes, what's the real impact? What's the difference between the perception and the reality? So you can double, triple, even quadruple densities in some neighborhoods simply without changing the feel or the character of the neighborhood by thinking about design. In other words, if we allowed what we call accessory dwelling units, which actually most communities now have to because of state legislation, that is simply converting a garage into a housing unit or allowing someone to put a new housing unit, 1 bedroom, 1 bath over a garage. And you can significantly increase the density simply by that one reform. And in many communities, you can go a long way to addressing housing supply with that one reform. Then there are other questions which I think are far more important and I think we have to address, but they're measurable. Congestion. If you have known the number of homes that are going to be built, housing units, rental housing units, you can make pretty good projections about the impact on the roads in terms of people that are leaving for work, commuting, cars coming in and out. We were able to estimate those costs, and then we were able to build into our impact fees, for example, the cost of building a turn lane that allows you to alleviate the congestion in that particular area. So I'm a big fan of saying, okay, let's take what people are concerned about and let's see what's measurable. What's real impact? And then how do we mitigate that? Other things we're going to find there simply aren't a problem. I mean, so higher density does not lead necessarily to higher crime, for example. You have more people, but that doesn't mean it's more crime. And so we can also bring those kinds of information. You can bring the local police department. They've all plot where the property crimes are and where the violent crimes are. And what you're going to find is that they're in places that people don't think. Or maybe they do think, but they're not as widespread as people think. So having a bunch of you know, even advanced career enlisted people who are generally going to be in the more affordable housing part of the ladder, those are not people that commit crimes. These are people that need access to good quality housing in the mid to lower range, but they are not going to be committing crimes. They are probably not going to be loud. They're not going to be having keg parties, at night. These are not college students. This is just becoming more sophisticated, but also taking the concerns of the community seriously, but bringing data into it. And then I think we can address it. This is certainly how we handled it when I was on the planning board. We'd say, okay, we hear you, we understand you. Here's what we know can do, and this is the best we can do. And then basically, if people felt they've been heard and they think that there's been a mitigation strategy that addresses that, they're okay. Not necessarily happy, but they're okay, and you can move forward.
Who's winning from the situation as it is right now? Who stands to gain the most from the way things are right now?
Existing homeowners who have a lot of equity in their home. There's no question. That's where you're getting the NIMBY. So they're not in my backyard people. And that's one of the practical problems we have to address. A friend of mine, and a very well-known urban economist named Bill Fischel, who wrote a book called The Home Voter Hypothesis. And the idea behind it, which is actually pretty common sense, is that who actually controls the city? Who actually manages the city?
Retired
Homeowners.
people.
Well, retired people, but usually homeowners
Yes,
as
absolutely.
well. And so the home voter, who is living in the community now, we are not representing future citizens. It's not even really our job. Who is representing the future citizens? Well, it actually was the land developers and the builders, because they're the ones that are forward focusing. They're saying people want to live in this county and they want to live in this community. And we're going to try to build the kinds of housing that they would find attractive. So we have this dynamic that we need to think about. And the planning process can be a way in which we can manage it, but often it isn't. So the big winners are going to be anybody who stays in their house. And especially if their kids are going to leave the community and live somewhere else, because now their kids don't have to buy in that community, they benefit. And that moves things quite a bit.
I tell the story all the time. So Niceville High School has about 500 kids that graduate from it every year. And my wife graduated from Niceville High School in 2011. So I just kind of like a thought experiment. I was like, how many people do you think live within 30 miles of Niceville High School that you went to class, with? She said roughly 50, maybe. Right. And so Niceville is an A school. We have really good schools here. We have a collegiate high school. We've paid for these very well-educated students to go out to the world and never come back and make Tampa a greater place to live or Atlanta a greater place to live because we don't have that affordable housing. Is that a fair argument, or am I just kind of like blowing smoke?
No, I think it's a fair argument. There are trade-offs with every choice. I think both as a society, but also an economy, we're better off having closer knit families. If our kids are graduating, our kids and our grandchildren will benefit from being close by.
Mhm.
Now, that's not going to happen everywhere. But when you have created a housing market that really takes out those early rungs of the lower rungs of the housing market, you make it more difficult for them to do that. Wouldn't it be better if we provided an incentive for them to stay local by making sure the housing, which is the single most important component of a budget for an early career family is affordable so that they can stay. And then once they start having kids, they end up anchoring themselves there. And that, I think that's good. I think that's actually a particularly important challenge for the Panhandle because of the tourist nature of it, because of the presence of the military, which is very transient as well. To the extent we want to embrace those retirement military folks, but also there's a fair amount of churn of people leaving the military at 10 or 15 years. If we can create and if they're going into jobs that, especially now, which they can do remotely, let's have them stay in Florida, stay in the Panhandle. It's very affordable. And then actually, my sister-in-law is works for a military contractor as a dentist.
Okay.
They just moved to Pensacola. So she can fly out of Pensacola. She can work in Minneapolis, does her work in Minneapolis. She's been to Virginia Beach, all these other places. To me, that is a great asset that we have in our communities, that we have affordable housing in a really nice area. It's got great balance. Yeah, maybe you don't want all the tourists coming down all the time. That creates other kinds of issues. And probably another show could be devoted to that, start trying to find that balance. But the Panhandle has a lot of things going for it. And unfortunately, if we allow the affordable housing to become a big issue, that's going to make it very difficult for the Panhandle to really sustain itself economically and demographically.
Interest rates and tariffs have been thrown around a ton when it comes to housing and affordable housing. Do you see those two national factors having an effect either statewide or locally here, kind of in the Panhandle?
Probably the biggest economic threat to lower income families or middle income families is inflation. That will wipe out gains faster than almost anything else can happen. So if we can keep inflation, I would like to see it get back to 2% a year. That was a very sustainable level. We had decades of 2% inflation, kept interest rates very, very affordable, allowed the housing market to adjust. And so I think that was fine. But then what's underneath that? And that's the big uncertainty right now, is we don't know if we're going to see another surge or if it's going to stay at 3% or maybe tick back. This is where tariffs kick in. Tariffs are already having an impact on prices. The question is whether or not those prices are going to be systemic enough through the economy that we begin to see it in inflation. And it's unclear at this point. As an economist, I'm more worried about tariffs in terms of its impact on employment and production than I am on prices right now. And I think right now, Florida, it's going to make us higher tariff rate is going to make it more difficult for Florida to diversify economically. We have a number of deep water ports with higher tariffs. Those ports are just not going to be nearly as active as they have been in the past. I'm a big proponent of trying to grow the state so that we become a sort of growth center for the Southeast, if not the nation. We have the capacity to do that with infrastructure. But the tariff policy right now, of course, we don't really know what's going to happen because they're on again, off again, is creating a lot of uncertainty. And if we're talking about 30 and 40% tariffs on countries which we do a lot of trade with, that's going to have a negative impact on on the national economy, but also on the Florida economy. And it's going to be a ripple effect through large retailers like Amazon, just as one of them, but also in terms of the availability of goods and services. Now we are going to we'll probably have lower quality goods that are going to be more expensive. A lot of uncertainty right now. So I may be talking it may sound like I really know what the future is going to be, but I don't. So I think keep in mind that this is a very uncertain time. The other thing I would say is be patient with the housing, is that there's a tendency to think if we see a spike in housing in maybe 1 month that we want to jump on housing as an investment or buy. Not necessarily. It's always good to step back and sort of think about, do I need this right now? If I absolutely have to move right now, that's fine. I think the only other thing I would say is let's make sure we're focusing on the rental market, not just the single family. I think we need more housing across these bands. But the data we have at the Devote More Center suggests that both Okaloosa County and Walton County have done reasonably well in the rental housing market, at least recently. More so Walton County than in Okaloosa. But let's just not think that the housing market is a single family home, especially in an area which is heavily tourist driven, heavily military driven, second home driven. A lot of rental housing is important to keep in mind. But other than that, just keep building along the whole range of housing markets.
Well, Professor Sam Staley, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you very much. This is a lot of fun.
Sure. Welcome back to everybody to Paul and Saul. I am Saul. He is Paul. And we are going to do the comment section because frankly, this is my favorite part of this. I think that like 90% of our show should just be the comment section because the level of it's amazing how just totally insightful and well thought out comments will sit right next to the most unhinged, written rule that I've ever seen in my entire life.
Sure.
And I am here for it. And the first thing I wanted to bring out is something that is not drool. It is in fact kind of important. You and I are both practicing Roman Catholics. And one of the things that we take very seriously is the fact that, priests are kind of valuable for us. They don't just kind of grow on trees. They're kind of hard to develop. It takes like 8 years to become a priest. And then you have to do this whole lifetime of, chastity. And that usually doesn't click for a lot of people. And so when we do get good ones, it's really important that we keep them. And so we have one
Seminarian.
Zach Arnold. So it's really hard to keep them because of, all the vows and the chastity and sometimes the poverty, depending on who you are. And it can be hard to keep them and maintain them. And that's why when we get them, we tend to keep them pretty close. We want to keep them safe for a while. So we have one seminarian named Zach Arnold, who is discerning the priesthood right now, and he needs kidney. Dialysis isn't working anymore. And he's at the point where the diocese is now putting out an all call to where if you got a spare one and it matches him, they are asking you to prayerfully consider donating it. I can't think of a higher calling than being a priest, just personally. I think it takes a special person. And so they don't come around a lot. So we got to defend them. So we're putting this out with the hopes that we can find somebody that has a kidney that can be donated.
Yeah, there'll be a link on Midbay News where you can then follow an additional link to see if you're a candidate for that. You can also call the diocese, Nancy Becerra.
Becerra.
Yeah. Do you have the phone number handy?
I do not have it on my noggin brain, but I've been emailing with her today, and I will add that as a link as well into this group. We're going to have just a whole bunch of links on this story, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's just important to help somebody out when in need, someone who's a man of God. So if you can do that, that would be fantastic.
Very good. Well, Evelyn, talking about our mutual friend Ian Grigsby's photo/video of a bear that was sighted last week, says, "Poor thing, it was probably looking for water. Our heat advisory today was out of sight. And my guy, I went running at 5:00 this morning, and the heat index was 89.
Yeah, I mean, it's July in Florida, and we're about to roll into August. It's definitely probably the hottest week it's been all year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the bear is probably okay. They hold up better than humans do out there. But what a really cool photo and video from Ian Grigsby, just on a family walk to stumble across the bear. That's cool.
I'm just glad that nature is just as scared of us as we are of it. I was talking to a friend who has some waterfront property, and they mentioned oh, we saw an alligator the other day. I was like, I'm never getting in the water again. They're like, they're more afraid of you than you are of them. And I was like, I don't believe you. So my heart wants to believe, but my head just doesn't. And I am afraid of all natural things.
Yeah, this next comment from Neil seems to be talking about condo construction out in Miramar Beach. I can't help but notice that the real estate people who complained in the meeting will be competing with the development and seem to complain about both the crowding issues and a lack of rental business. Seems strange.
So I am curious about your insight on this because as somebody that develops property, right? To me, on its face, that makes a lot of sense. You don't want competition, but I would also think that just based on what I've seen with you developing properties in the Niceville area, the NIMBYism, the not in my backyardism seems to affect everybody equally. And so when one person is able to crack the code on getting, healthy development that's a little more dense so that people can live here, that seems like a win for everybody. But I would love to know your thoughts because this echelon thing has been planned for 20 years and they haven't done it. And it's going to be 300 units in a really narrow space that's going to be confined. So is there a balance or is this kind of an on-off switch sort of thing where it's either good or bad?
Well, I mean, we definitely need more inventory. And what people don't realize is like a lot of that costs a lot of money and a lot of capital for these places. And so they often see the rental prices and they're like, oh, well, this doesn't make sense. But it is crazy expensive to develop. And there's a lot of hurdles that you have to go over. Just need more inventory. And if we can approve more and more condo and apartment complexes, you're going to see the prices eventually come down, or you're going to see that it's an oversaturation and people will stop building them. Now, I think the problem that Walton County has close to the beach versus the problems that Niceville has are completely different thing. Both need affordable housing. Yes, that's true, but you're not going to see 400 unit apartment complexes pop up in Niceville very often. I think just the one in Deer Moss Creek. Everything else around here is infill projects, much smaller, but we need a lot more of those to help the Niceville community out. And Walton County needs as many condos and apartments as it can to lower the cost of living there for the people who do the work there.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure all these complexes are built for that. A lot of these complexes are built with the purpose to maximize profit.
We'll see. Well, that's all we have for this week's Paul and Saul. We are proud to bring you local news with a local impact.
Yeah, remember to subscribe to the newsletter, midbaynews.com/newsletter. But even more important, go to midbaynews.com/donate and become a recurring donating member to not only the Paul and Saul Show, but Midbay News in general. And you'll be included in a private Facebook group and future private events. And you can be a Midbay News newsie by going to midbaynews.com/donate.
Well, hey guys, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week. Paul, let them know.
See you guys later. Be nice, Niceville.